Hello, everyone. This is Luke Johnson of Noetic, the Humanities Teaching app. Bob Schut is joining me today to discuss Sartre's No Exit. Something we've never done before is talk about a play. And it's proving to be a little bit difficult because I'm excessively sleep deprived and I don't have my glasses, which will help me relate to these characters. I'm going to let Bob describe the plot here in a second because I think he has the brain wattage that I don't have right now to describe every event that occurs in Sartre's 1944 play that originally was called In Focus, or In Camera, I should say. And there's a brilliant version of it online on YouTube that is an English production, I believe, starring Paul Tiller or something like that. They should check out. It's something we'll probably reference a lot here. One of the challenges that I encountered in prepping for this play, I thought, oh, we just do this easy play, is that there are so many complex Sartrean ideas such as bad faith, authenticity, the transcendence of the ego, being for itself, being in itself. I really wish that perhaps if I could go back in time, I would have had read Sartre's essay, what is existentialism, being in nothingness, transcendence of the ego, so I could do an exhaustive, authoritative rendering of this text. But I think what Bob and I learned in the process of doing this, that you don't necessarily need to have all that background to have a really rich educational experience with this play. And I'll let him talk about that.
Yeah, well, if you would have done all those prerequisites, you would have had to have a different partner than me, because I wouldn't have been able to keep up with you. But one of the things that's important here, we discussed earlier, is what about the person who doesn't have that background? Well, can they really get anything from this play? And absolutely. This appeals to any play. If you enjoy watching an old Twilight Zone, it has that same feel to it, that same idea to it. You don't really need to know anything about Sartre to enjoy it and actually to learn something from it. You can watch it with whatever background you have. If you have a background in psychology, you can analyze the three main players, or perhaps the fourth one as well, as different perhaps personality disorders. If you're more familiar with the idea of the stages of grief, you can superimpose that into the play and understand that. Or if you're really like Kierkegaard, like Luke and I do, you can see this through the eyes of the despair that Kierkegaard talks about. So there's different ways to approach this play. Now, I was also wanted to ask you, Luke, I'm really not dressed to present Sartre, am I? I'm supposed to be wearing a dark shirt. Everything has to be black. Every picture you see of him and of existentialists. So I'm the iconoclast today. I'm playing that role. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, I don't know. There'll be a little bit of irony there. Good thing we work in audio, so it doesn't really matter. But if you got anybody what Bob looks like, just imagine him in all black. I meant to say Harold Pinter, the Harold Pinter version of In Camera or No Exit that you can find out there. He's dressed like your typical existentialist, if there's such a thing. So, we're probably going to be jumping all around, talking about our favorite quotations and what ideas they may illustrate of Sartre's. But I think for anyone, we probably need to pin down the characters and what plot there is. I mean, there's not a lot of stuff that happens. I mean, physically, there's not a lot of things that move this thing along. There aren't like storms or twists of fate or anything like that. Our individuals kind of end up together, and then a lot of like micro movements happen. A lot of micro aggressions. A lot of psychological torment takes place. But really, very few events happen out in sort of the external concrete world. And I don't know, I'll just let Bob lead us through that, and I'll weigh in when I can, talking about the four characters that are involved in this play.
Yeah, it's probably best that we kind of use the play itself as the foundation to present it, because otherwise, trying to do it in isolation, I don't think is going to make any sense to anybody, nor is probably the best way. So the play opens up, and in a room, the valet, which he's nameless as far as I can remember. There's no name. He's the valet. He appears, and this environment, if you have to picture in your mind, it's like checking into a hotel room. It doesn't resemble anything about hell. And Garson is the first character who's introduced. He's led into this cheap hotel room by the valet. And he starts to discuss with the valet, well, where do you keep all the torture racks? And, the pokers, the hot pokers and all that stuff. That's his impression of what he expected in hell. And he notices there's no mirrors in there. And then he starts to worry about the amenities. He didn't bring his toothbrush. Where did they, how dare they not provide him with a toothbrush here? No beds and no eyelids, even so that they can sleep. So at this point, why don't you give a little profile on the rest of Garcon and who he was?
All right. So Garcon, this is a little tough to do because I don't want to give away too much of the plot by describing Garcon in full. What we should know is kind of how this delusional self-image that he presents to everyone at the beginning is that he is this principled pacifist newspaper man who lives in Rio de Janeiro and is morally opposed to the war that is occurring in Algiers. And we find out, each of these individuals is in hell. They know that they are absent, or whatever euphemism they use to connotate that they are no longer alive. We learn about how each of them got there, kind of opaquely. He tells everyone when he gets the opportunity that he ends up in hell because he took this principled pacifist stand and he was summarily rounded up and shot by firing squad and was pierced by 12 bullets. And his dear wife is mourning his loss as we speak because the jacket has been returned to her with the rust blood bullets, and this it should be in a museum, this historical artifact of his. But we'll learn more about him. Do you think I should say more about him?
No, because that unfolds in the story. It's probably best to see that as it unfolds. And it's important to bring that up because the more you watch it, I think both Luke and I have been through this play now 3 times, and the dialogue, as Luke said, he says it's not a lot of things that are happening as far as action-packed. The dialogue, though, every single word, every single gesture is significant. So when you watch the play, it's a story unfolding, but every piece of dialogue is supposed to be significant here.
Right. It's some of the dialogue we should point out in what you've talked about already in the plot is how the valet scoffs at Garcon for thinking that there is a physical torture, someone that's going to impose pain upon them. He laughs at this idea, thinking that only humans could come up with such a story when they've never even really been to this place. Mm-hmm. The lack of mirrors is going to be a big thing that we discuss. I just want to highlight that. And also the having no eyelids, not being able to sleep, not being able to rest, that they're being sort of eternally day in this strange timeless place. I say timeless because it's not quite eternity, but it seems to be a parallel universe to whatever's going on Earth. So, so why don't you go from there, Bob?
Okay, and one of the other things I want to bring out that we wonder, well, why does he go through and talk about all these things? He's setting up, of course, the environment, but one of the complaints that he had was he didn't have his amenities. He didn't have his toothbrush. And you think, well, okay, let's just not think about that. That was just a little funny line. But it wasn't really, because what it does is it captures the idea that Garcon and all of them actually are going to start off in that phase of denial. This isn't really what it's supposed to be. I need my toothbrush. I need comfort. I need to make this place like Earth rather than like hell.
Yeah, and I need to make it. I need to make it mine. right? That's
Yes.
a big thing is the possessive nature of it. Well, one of the interesting things that these characters can do while they're in this drawing room, which I believe I've heard, there's a great lecture out there by Dr. Gregory Sadler where he pointed this out, that the drawing room is decorated in the style of like the Second Empire or something like that. And apparently this is a place where guests congregated before they went somewhere else, kind of like an anteroom. I don't know much about it and what the significance is. It has like, in the movie, it has a lot of like horrid modern art, a lot of eyes reflecting back at them and like strange conceptual sculptures and whatnot. It's pretty, it's pretty ugly stuff.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that we should talk about, one of the interesting features that these individuals can do while they're in this drawing room is that they can peer back down onto Earth, and frequently they talk about their things, their jacket, my lover, that's my bed, that's my thing, that's my that. And I think that's not there unnecessarily. I wouldn't be surprised if that is illustrating this level of consciousness for Sartre called being for itself. But we'll talk more about that later.
Yeah, and it kind of shows that they've lost control over what happened. They're not there anymore, maybe insignificant, or maybe they're not in control, because this whole play has a lot to do with control, as we'll see. Each one is trying to control the other, and yet each one is becoming a victim of the other's manipulation. So I think the idea that they could see down on Earth also reflects they've lost control over their loved ones, over their situation, over people's opinions about who they are. Then the valet, there's a few minutes there that Garson goes around and he pokes around at all the little things on the shelf to kind of examine them and look at them. And there's a whole sequence about a bell that he can call the valet. But then the valet leaves, and then he comes back and he has another woman with him, Inez. And she comes in and she expects to see her lover, Florence. So
right. She has a great line here, right? She's like, "Oh, I get it. Torture by separation."
Right. Because she kind of implies that she knows, at least some part of her knows she's in hell. But she sees Garson and she says, "Are you the torturer? You must be the torturer." And of course he denies that. But she already begins a manipulation of him with the dialogue. She seems to be very aloof to everything that's happening. Like none of this is bothering her. She's untouchable. And he wants to create some kind of a courteous relationship with her. Let's all be friends.
Yeah.
But she kind of grabs onto that idea and she plays with him.
Yeah. And I think one of the most pivotal sort of exchanges that goes on between them here is that she assumes that Garson is going to be the torturer, and he's like, "Oh God, no!" And she's like, and then he's like, "Well, let me ask, do I have the features of a torturer?" And she's like, "Well, I would know," something along the effect of like, "Well, I know torturers look afraid," and she's like, "I would know because I am one." And this is a theme that will be developed more later about how all these characters tortured individuals on Earth and how they are going to practice an economy of devil power by torturing one another in this drawing room. So why don't you go ahead with more?
Okay, and there's another line here that happens between Garson and Inez, and a number of things that Garson is going to say here. This one line, "But I'm not afraid." He wants to deny. He doesn't want anyone to think that he's afraid here, because his alter ego, I guess we might say, is being a hero. He wants to impress everybody like he's a hero. It's kind of a self-protective device here. So again, a denial that I'm in control, so I'm not afraid. So why don't you give a little profile on Inez now. I don't think we've done that yet. So I need to know a little
Well,
background.
yeah. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, Inez is a postal clerk. She comes in calling for Florence, so we could infer that. I mean, and there are going to be things that come out in the play, specifically how Inez relates to the next character, Estelle, that will establish that Inez is a lesbian. Inez is quite proud of the fact that she is not courteous, and at points in the play, she'll refer to herself as a damned bitch, and she always has been. She's always kind of known it. I think she's one of the only characters in the play that doesn't have any real hope of getting out. I think she's always kind of known that she's been condemned in some way, or has known about what her where things are going to end up for her. I could say more. Do you think that's sufficient, or do you think I should say?
Yeah,
more?
that's all we need to do. We'll kind of go over it. A little abbreviation. We'll get into that. And during this meeting, Inez observes Garson. Apparently, Garson is making some facial gestures with his mouth, and she again. We have to understand this is all part of manipulation. She yells at him and she says, "Can't you keep your mouth still? You keep twisting it about all the time. It's grotesque." And here Garcin, his response is interesting because he says, "Oh, so sorry. I wasn't aware of it." So here's the heroine the hero, and he's not afraid of anything, but he seems to back down from her almost at every turn. She knows which buttons to push on Garson.
Well, it's interesting to show how, in one of the many lectures that I consumed in preparation for this, Sartre said something to the effect of, I can't remember where, but he said something of that you're at age 50, your face reveals your character. That somehow there is this communication of who you are in your essence through your physical being, and even if you say nothing, that intentionality can be picked up on by others. Mm-hmm. But that's something else entirely.
So now we have the third party enters into the room with the valet. Her name is Estelle, and this finishes the trio here. She finds the first thing as she enters into the room, she's kind of horrified. She's expecting to see somebody with their face blown off, right?
Right. She's screaming, entering the room, thinking she's going to find someone with their face shot off, right? And she says it so quickly, and it's such a high register in the movie that you're not even sure what the heck she's talking about. It makes much more sense as time goes on. And then immediately, Garson's like, "Oh, don't worry, I'm not the torturer." She's like, "I don't care about any of you." Like, she immediately kind of snaps, she kind of gets her senses back or whatever, but she's the last one to show up. Mm-hmm. And she, maybe while I'm talking, I'll just say something about her as a character.
Yeah. Okay.
She's a bit coquettish, kind of a trophy wife who, married a man 3 times her age. This is what she tells us, and that her greatest sin was sort of giving her youth up to marry a man for financial advantageous purposes for herself and her brother, since they were very poor. And there was some talk of maybe having an affair or something like that. But in general, she thinks that she's there by mistake. And Bob, why don't you say some of the stuff that she says when she first gets there? And she,
right. Yeah, and that mistake, just to point out, since you mentioned that idea of a mistake is part of that denial phase. It's not happening. It should be happening to somebody else. They've made a mistake. So that's part, again, if you're viewing it through the eyes of the grief, that's part of this denial stage. So the first thing she does is she finds fault with the decor in the room. She says, "It's those sofas. They're so hideous." And she says, "I'm in pale blue and it's vivid green." So this kind of reveals a little bit about her personality. She tends to see things in that perspective, as to everything is about looks. The superficiality of things is what she's kind of portraying here. And then she starts to manipulate Garson. These things are so subtle. she talks about that sofa. Well, I can't sit in that sofa because it's the wrong color. And then she waits and she looks at Garcin, and then he starts to feel nervous and he says, well, how about my seat? And she says, oh, how wonderful. What a gentleman, But this was, and again, she's feeling him out. And she says, what's his weaknesses? And being the coquettish type of woman she is, she throws her looks around, her body around, her flirtatiousness around. And Garcin just doesn't see through it. So he gets up and says, okay, have my seat. And I think that you mentioned that she died of pneumonia, I think. And she sees that happening down on Earth. I guess she looks into the past, or maybe it's a reflection. She sees her death as someone just kind of far removed. Well, I had pneumonia and then I died.
Right, and she's she can see that she's so like this all happens within like, I don't know, 10 minutes for us in the movie or in the play or something like that. And so apparently Inez and Garcin have been together in hell for what they say are weeks, but she's like, oh, I died yesterday, but they all seem to show up at about the same time. And then she can peer back down on Earth and see that the ceremony isn't even over yet. And she's like, come on, sister, let me see those tears coming out of your eyes. Yes, 1, 2. She's like, I can see them underneath the black veil. But I think this is where we first get an intimation that the time that is going on in No Exit is not earthly time. Time moves much slower for them, which kind of hints at some of what might be a constitutive feature of hell, is the absolute crawl of it compared to the hustle and bustle of Earth.
Right.
Because things can, like, they'll dial in and out of that earthly realm and months will go by, and like it's only been like 20 minutes for them. So,
and just kind of one line here, we talk about manipulation, and I know we can't quote every line. I'll have to probably trim it back a little bit, but it was interesting. I thought it was interesting how Estelle treats the valet. Did you pick up on that? The valet says, do you require me any longer? And she kind of snaps back at him and says, no, you can go. I'll ring you when I want you. And it's like, again, that superiority thing. She's in control. Even the valet is demeaned in her eyes.
Well, it's a silly, I mean, she treats him like the help, but the reality is he has powers to control their situation. We haven't really talked about the valet very much. He's a pretty interesting character in the sense that he's kind of on the sidelines, but he is probably a low-ranking devil of some sort, if this is hell. And he's actually pretty polite.
He handled himself pretty well in that comment,
Yeah, he's pretty polite. We know that he does not work for management. So, and we know that sometimes the valet takes time off to go visit his uncle on the 3rd floor, which is presumably a higher ranking devil or something like that. Now, what's interesting, we learn about this space because Garcin is like kind of interested in, do the lights ever go off? He's like, oh no. He's like, the lights are on all the time. And Garcin's like asking, what's beyond this room? And he's like, more passages, more rooms. And he's like, okay, outside of that? He's like, well, there isn't. I think the interesting question maybe to ask ourselves is, who might management be? I think this is all really interesting stuff that Sartre, at least at this time, self-proclaimed atheist, is sort of imagining an afterlife and people that are pulling the strings in this afterlife. Now, we have to ask ourselves why he's doing that. Is he trying to scare people about what hell may be really like? Probably not, if he's an atheist at this point. I think what Sartre is trying to say is like, no, this is an essential aspect of the human condition, that we just have this play to sort of crystallize it and bring it out for us. I think the question that we'll have to ask as we go through this play is are we all destined to just experience hell, or are there going to be ways that we can work ourselves out of it? And is there any sort of optimism for breaking ourselves out of this hell? And we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, and they do have highlights of optimism, as we'll see, which are usually crushed pretty quickly. But one of the, again, another line that Inez uses on Estelle is, "You're very pretty. I wish we've had some flowers to welcome you with." Again, being the lesbian, she's trying to make her moves on Estelle and feel Estelle out to see how that
Right.
plays out, which we'll see. So then they decide they're going to discuss things. Well, why don't they talk about the obvious? How did you get here? Right? How did you die?
Well, they've got their. So do we want to talk about like the initial story that they give, or do we want to talk about?
Build it up. Yeah, we don't want to give too much away, so we can build it up.
Well, I kind of feel like I've already told, with the exception of Inez. I didn't really tell how Inez died, and I'm kind of trying to remember here how she told it to begin with. But I feel like I've already sort of said how they die.
Yeah. Well, she was living with her cousin, her male cousin, who had I guess a girlfriend or a wife, and she was having an affair with his wife, and he got hit by a bus, and so it was just the two women left, and I guess Inez kept harassing her girlfriend now to the point that she had enough. So she turned the gas on one night, and they both died.
I guess. So, yeah, I guess.
I think that was Florence, right? That was Florence, I think.
Yeah. So I guess Inez is a little bit more upfront about her skeletons. Still at this point, Estelle and Garcon are trying to portray themselves as heroic and pitiable figures.
Then they start to have a little small talk. They want to be a little cordial with each other. Estelle doesn't want to call it. This is really interesting here. Let me see if I can find the line here. Garcon says, talking about his death, and he says, 12 bullets through my chest. Sorry, I fear I'm not good company among the dead. And Estelle goes, please don't use that word. She says, I suggest we call ourselves, absentees. So they refer to themselves as absentees rather than the dead. And if that's not avoidance and denial, I don't know what is, right? That's a perfect picture of that avoidance. And then Garcon discusses his wife, talks about his wife a little bit. And I think you mentioned before that he wants to take his jacket. Oh, no. Garcon wants to take his jacket off. And Estelle sees him doing this, and she manipulates him out of taking his jacket off. He's getting hot. I don't know whether that has anything to play on hell or not, but he's getting hot and warm, so he wants to take his jacket off. But Estelle says, oh, no, I like a man much better wearing his jacket. I don't like to see a man in his shirt sleeves. And so Garcon says, oh, sorry, okay. So he puts his jacket back on. Again, he's trying to portray himself as the man, the masculine guy, the hero. And yet he's manipulated so easily by Estelle. Then this is where Inez says, they talk about men, and Inez says, well, I don't like men. And she says, nothing is done here by chance. Everything is laid out the way it's supposed to be. Even the circumstances of the room are by design.
Right.
But yet Estelle seems to emphasize the idea that she's there by mistake.
And you can't blame her, right? You can't blame her for thinking that. She's like, oh, thousands of people become absentee every single day. And, there's this large metaphysical mechanism, and probably someone low, some understrapper, some dumb employee just made an error, and I'm here by mistake. And, well, all of you could be here by mistake, too. We just need to consult the management and let them know that they just need to rectify this situation. Like they went to a restaurant and got the wrong the order or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. Again, denial. Then Garcon follows making himself sound like a hero. He starts telling his story, but he leaves out a lot. Well, they all leave out a lot of details here as to what happened. But Estelle doesn't want to discuss it at first. And she starts to kind of rant a little bit. So Garcin says, why don't you shut up? He's beginning to reach his limit. And then Inez comments that the torture is missing as well. So you can see that this relationship is going up and down between them. That's one of the things you'll see in the story. It's not like it starts out at one point and then slowly reaches the end of the conclusion. It goes back and forth within the plot. Sometimes they're getting along really well, and then all of a sudden something flares up and they're at each other's throat again.
Should we say something about here how Inez is able to discern where the real torture is going to come from, right? I've already sort of alluded this.
Yeah.
And we can see this already, is that they're all interconnected. They can't really separate themselves from one another, and that there's going to be an economy of man or devil power, and they are all going to torture one another psychologically. And we'll see that these small aggressions actually amount to more distress and pain than any sort of fire and brimstone sermon could ever have imagined. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's all about. Even you mentioned kind of how they remark on the stuffiness of the room. The room's not like 9,000 degrees, right? Like
right.
It would actually, I think after a while, they would really want it to be 9,000 degrees, because then they would be immediately incinerated and they wouldn't have consciousness anymore. Mm-hmm. But it's just hot enough to make them go insane, or to gradually go insane.
Yeah.
Like this is some serious, like, psychological torture. Like this is some serious, and Inez compares it to a cafeteria that has a buffet that allows you to serve yourself. We're just torturing ourselves. Like, you know, they got limited resources and they want to, you know, spread that torture out pretty evenly. So that's, you know, if they had done, I think it's an interesting question about whether or not they could have had this level of circular torture if it had been another arrangement of individuals, or if Inez, Garcon, and Estelle were destined, I don't know, from the moment they entered Earth, or from the moment that they committed their sins that we'll learn about, to be together in this room for all time, whatever time is. And I think there's also an interesting question if torture can really only happen, or you need 3 people to have the torture. You know, the big thing, this thing is going to culminate, and I don't think I'm giving away anything that people don't already know. One of the things that Sartre is most famous for, it's like Descartes' cogito ergo sum, is saying hell is other people, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't say hell is a person. It doesn't say hell is another. Hell is other people, implying more than 2. Because I think there's a lot of people that think heaven is like just being with the love of your life or whatever. But when you add a 3rd person in there, and we'll see that there are a number of scenarios that the 3 of them prevent, the fact that there are 3, it totally prevents the other 2 from getting along.
Yeah, it throws the equilibrium off. It throws that equilibrium off.
Like Inez hates Garcon because Estelle is so obsessed with the male gaze and her perception in it that Inez can't manipulate Estelle into having the lesbian relationship, and Garcon like hates Estelle because he's totally preoccupied with how others view him in terms of his character. So, you know, one of them's always throwing it off.
Good. Then Garcin, and following through with the plot here, Garcin suggests that they keep to themselves and don't talk. So his idea is, I'm not going to talk. If I don't hear it, it doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. So let's just not talk about it. We'll all be silent. But he makes an interesting comment. I'm sure you picked up on this. This way we can work out our salvation. So there still seems to be hope in Garcin that somehow we can improve our situation. Whereas Estelle thinks it's all a mistake. He thinks, well, we can work it out. And this isn't the last time he says this. So he's trying to figure out, how can I get out of this? says, if I can just meditate on this in silence, I need silence to think about this, I can come up with a way of salvation.
Yeah, I hope we get to that. Because what he'll do is he'll propose a number of salvation scenarios, and even Estelle does as well. As it's not such a proposition as an act at the end of the play. We'll talk more about this, but it's interesting to use the word salvation for this stuff. And usually, when you think about salvation, none of the traditional options for salvation occur to them, right? But of course, that's why they're damned, right? Isn't this interesting? They know they're in hell, but there's like no reference to God in hell at all, right?
Right.
It's like, and maybe it's like the elephant in the room is that like maybe these people are damned precisely because they can't even acknowledge God. Like maybe they are totally separated from God. Like I was thinking about it, there are no books there. Like they can't like evolve as people. They have like no connection to the fount of all being. And then like I'm just like, that might be your like easiest opportunity for salvation, but it never even crosses their minds, and maybe never crosses Sartre's mind either. I mean, he is an atheist at this point.
Right. But this silence doesn't last very long. Estelle gets kind of nervous because she doesn't like silence, probably because she doesn't want to do any reflection on herself. So
yeah, she's got some skeletons.
Right. She's this kind of a person who's trying to live in the physicality of it, to hide, and we'll see how she does that. Estelle breaks the silence over her need for a mirror for her makeup. She's got to put on a little more makeup here. Apparently her lipstick got smudged. So she tries to manipulate Inez by being the coquette. And she panics about her lipstick being crooked. Apparently she wants to look good for Garson. And Inez sees this as an opportunity to seduce Estelle. So she says, well, you don't have a mirror. She says, but why don't you look into my eyes? And you can see your reflection in my eyes. That probably speaks to a lot of things, because that's actually what's going on here, is each person is seeing themselves in the eyes of the other person. But here she means it in a physical sense. And she makes some remarks. Estelle makes some remarks like, okay, I will. Oh, but I'm so small in there, I can't really make out my lips here. And so Inez says, well, let me help you. I'll guide you with your lipstick here. But this is all part of Inez trying to seduce Estelle. But the seduction doesn't work. She tells her about something about Garson, that she's really trying to impress Garson, and that really turns her off. And then she quickly says, well, everything is okay except for that big pimple you have on your cheek. And that she knows what buttons to press. So Estelle panics. I have a pimple on my face. I can't be. And then she says, no, I was only saying that. But Estelle is satisfied that Inez finds her attractive. This still kind of plays on her because she wants to be attractive. This is how she hides who she really is. She puts on more makeup. She's so involved in that phase of her life that it becomes a mask. And maybe that's how Sartre wants to portray that her makeup becomes a mask of hiding behind something that she really isn't. But her interest in Garson, as Luke pointed out, really upsets Inez, and she sees this as a big competition. Then Inez, because of this, she begins to harass Garson. And now they're talking again. Now Garson's whole idea of maintaining silence is over with. Estelle becomes, between Inez and Garson at this time, becomes the prize, right? Each one of them want to try to win Estelle over, but Estelle sees that, and she says, hey, I can play both of them now. I can get the feedback I want from each one of them. And then Garson realizes that the scheme that apparently the devil or whoever it is orchestrating this, the idea was to put him in a room with two women. And this is supposedly going to drive him crazy. And so far it's pretty much working.
Right, because he can't. He's like, I just can't hear myself think. But I mean, really, would he have been in any better situation with men? Because he's totally obsessed with looking back into the newsroom where all the men are debating his legacy.
Right.
And it's like he's in two hells.
Yeah, I think he sees things maybe it could have been better, but it really couldn't have been better because he's bringing the problem with him wherever he goes, whether he's with men or with women. So Garson now decides that confession is going to be the salvation. So silence didn't work. So now let's try confession. Maybe we can save ourselves here.
And this is where it gets really juicy. So let's get into this. Let's get into the salacious details. They are unmasking themselves, and I guess is it Garson that goes first, right?
Yeah, Garson jumps in and he says, well, hell, I was an abuser. I abused my wife for, 5 years, I think he said. He says, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm in hell. Then he romanticizes his life a little bit in his execution, that he was really trying to write a journal or a magazine of what was it? Of peace. He wanted to portray peace. Yeah, but right now there was lots of revolt going on, I guess, where he was in Rio de Janeiro, and he was trying to be the pacifist, and so he got captured and he was shot because he was a heroic pacifist. And he says, I regret nothing. And then he starts to blame his wife a little bit for putting up with his abuse. So you can kind of see him again trying to shift to get himself out of the blame.
Right. He says to his wife, if anything, she was too enamored with him, and it made it too easy for him to abuse her. And specifically, we should talk about the abuse of how he always came home drunk, smelling of women, until eventually one time he brought home a woman. I guess his wife was living on the first floor and he was on the top floor, and she knew that his wife heard everything when he brought this woman home, and his wife was so enamored with him that she still served them coffee in bed.
Yeah, that's a picture hard to imagine.
That's hard, yeah. So, and it's a picture so hard to imagine that Inez is just like, how could you? Mm-hmm. Inez, this really cynical, sadistic postal clerk who has no hope in anything. Even she can't believe that Garson would do that to another human being. Inez is quite the torturer herself, as we've seen already, and we'll get a little bit more information on. But she found that to be especially problematic. Now, do you think that this is why Garson really ends up in hell? Because, and I don't know. Maybe, I think we should speed it along here a little bit, because I think we have a lot of like big themes to talk about and stuff like that. If we could say, it's probably the fact that he tortured his wife in that way with the adultery and the emotional abuse and the sexual abuse. But the other thing is that we learn that Garson might be a type of, he might be a type for Sartre, specifically someone who exemplifies bad faith, meaning that they are individuals determined by their bodily constitution or external forces rather than making authentic sort of choices for themselves that they resolutely defend. Precisely the problem with Garson is that he says that he is this principled pacifist and makes all these choices and flirts with danger for principled pacifism. But what we learn in this examination is that he actually runs away, and he doesn't know if he gets on a train to avoid the conflict, if he's doing it because he's a coward, or if he did it because he's a truly inspired pacifist. And I think it raises a lot of interesting psychological questions. Like, for instance, like, why do Bob and I get together and have these conversations online, right? Like, there are some primary motives and reasons that we can tell everybody about that we're quite proud of, right? Like, for instance, we love spreading knowledge. We love providing education. We love the friendship and everything like that comes out about. But, if I be honest and put myself out there for examination like these characters, there's some selfish stuff that may motivate me to be talking right now on camera. Like, there might be some egoism and some narcissism that's driving this, maybe more than I can even recognize. And I think that makes me sympathetic to the character of Estelle and how she's so obsessed with her appearance in the mirror. Like, I don't look in the mirror anymore, but I sure as hell make a recording of myself every day and put it on the internet. So I don't know, maybe I'm just as superficial as her. But that the fact that Garcon can't work out whether or not he's a brave man or a coward is a theme that is going to haunt the rest of this play and a lot of the themes that we're developing. I think he deeply suspects that he's a coward. He's got to try to convince everybody that he's not. He's got to try to convince Estelle that he's not, and then Inez that he's not. But he's not very. And even the people that are still down there in the newsroom, he tries to communicate. I don't know, telepathically or something, that he's not a coward. If only they could really see his reasons.
Yeah, and he thought that if they could, well, later on, I think we'll see, if he could only get one person to admit that he wasn't a coward, that would be his salvation. That was another plan he had. If all I can do is just convince one person I wasn't a coward, then I'll have my salvation.
Which is totally crazy, like just to get people to recognize you for something, right? Mm-hmm. And to think that your salvation, that who you are, is bound up with that. I think Sartre is trying to say that you are like that. This is an act of bad faith. That you are letting the perceptions of others determine who you are, rather than your innermost being. Right? You're having your essence be determined by others, and when you have your essence determined by others, this splitting of being in itself, being for itself, being in itself is usually, I guess, what we talk about is kind of the furniture of the world, kind of tables and chairs and walls and things like that, just things in themselves. And being for themselves have a certain sort of consciousness, right, where they have attachment to things, right? And only humans really have this, from what I understand of Sartre's phenomenology and psychology, is that by basing so much of what he is on the perception of others, he does great violence to his freedom and is reduced into this realm of determined objects. And they all seem to have that ability, especially Estelle and Garcon, where they are externally determined by the perceptions of others, and therefore are not really fully actualized beings in some way.
Right, definitely, well put. Going back to what you were saying also about each one of them was looking for that defining moment, that act that was considered a sin, the act that sent them to hell, right? And I think that maybe, I don't know whether Sartre actually believes that, or whether he's portraying it that way because he wants to bring out something about that. But it's not as though there's one defining moment, one defining act that we do, that we commit, that sends us to hell. It's who we are, and it's our relationship with God and with others. That if we lose that relationship, then we are destined for just to kind of extend that absence of God into eternity. It's not like if we committed one act, that's it, we're done. You have to somehow make amends for that act, and then you can go back to heaven again. I know some religions portray it that way, but that's not how I understand it. I don't understand it as being that defining moment. Remember, Jesus taught the Pharisees, and he said, Moses said, "Thou shalt not kill," but I say unto you, even if you hate your brother, you're in danger of judgment. So sin really goes much deeper than the act. It's who we are and that relationship that we have, not necessarily that one act that we perform. But that's how this play is portraying it. If that can, they keep saying, well, was that a sin? Do you think that was a sin that I did this?
Yeah. So, well, I think the thing is, I don't think, Sartre's thinking about it so much in relation to God, though. I think it helps us to think about that just in generally as we meditate on the play. But yeah. I think you're absolutely right to point out that Sartre's not going to say it is not one act that defines us. That is our entire life and how we continually choose our essence of what we will be that makes us what we are. Sartre is famous for saying existence precedes essence. and that we constantly have to continually to affirm what our essence is, right? It's like Garçon's under this delusion that if, well, he can get one person to think that he's brave, that will wash away all his indiscretions and problems. If he can show up to the firing squad and stare down his executioners, then that will atone for the past. But he can't even get that right. Apparently he squirms, or I don't know, pees his pants or whatever else before he gets shot. He can't even die with courage.
Right.
So all these individuals are looking for some singular act. And I think what Sartre's trying to get at is that the only way to really have a meaningful life where we're not filled with regret about how we've chosen to live is to constantly reaffirm our essence through choice and through freedom.
Right. Now we go to the next. So that kind of finishes Garçon. Then we go to Estelle. Now do we want
to talk about Inez some more? Because I think we left out just a few details about Inez's death that are pretty essential for understanding how she.
You're right. I skipped down there. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Inez's famous line is, "I was a damn bitch." What people would say, a damn bitch. So she's kind of confessing that she knows at least who she is. She has an affair with Florence, and this is that story I said about her cousin's wife. He got hit by a bus. She accepted her guilt about that, but in a sort of proud way, that she's kind of proud of what unfolded there with him. He deserved it. He got hit by the bus, but he was some kind of a idiot anyway. It really didn't matter.
Yeah, I want to say, I think we need to dwell on this. It's not that I think the play intimates that he didn't just accidentally get hit by a bus. I think the play intimates, at least how I read and viewed the movie, it seemed to me that Inez knew that both her and Florence tortured her cousin so much with this lesbian affair that he threw himself in front of the bus, and that they co-killed him, that they co-murdered him, and they had that on their conscience. And then Inez knows that she is such a torturer. She lords this over Florence to the point where Florence can't stand to be around Inez or herself anymore, and turns on the gas and kills both of them in their sleep.
Yeah, that sounds pretty. I think you're right about that. Maybe I missed that point. I think you're right. When you explain it that way, it does make more sense than being an accident. And that's what happened when they got gassed together, her and Florence, and they both died. And so that's Inez. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, it's just like Inez, she compares herself to that hot coal that can reduce everyone to a cinder. Do you remember that line?
Yeah, I do.
I think she feels like she pushed her cousin and she pushed Florence to their absolute end. And I think she's at the same time, when she's bound up with Garçon and Estelle in this hellacious environment, she is taking that skill and pushing them to their uttermost extreme. Hence why both of them would rather be physically tortured or be done with Inez altogether, as we'll see later on.
Yeah, Let me read that. As a matter of fact, that little phrase that you just mentioned has something else in it that I wanted to mention. So Inez says this, I'll tell you later, when I say I'm cruel, I mean I can't get on without making people suffer, like a live coal in others' hearts. When I'm alone, I flicker out. For 6 months, I flamed away in her heart till there was nothing but a cinder. One night she got up, turned the gas on while I was asleep, and then she crept back into bed. So now you know. That was the line you meant, right?
Yeah.
So it seems that Inez kind of understands who she is a little bit more than the other two in a way. Did you get that feeling?
Yeah, Inez is incredibly smart. Inez knows who she is, and I think Inez recognizes the situation and the reality of it, the situation, more so than any of them. I mean, she's the one who figures that out, that they're torturing one another. She's the one that figures it out, that it's not a chance that they're there. She's really bright. She knows what's going on. She knows what she is.
Yeah, and she's using it as well. And now we go to Estelle. Uh, she doesn't know what she did at first. She
This
doesn't
is
look like she did anything wrong here. When you hear the story, it's pretty strange that she doesn't realize what she did was wrong. She married a rich man. I think it was said was 3 times his age or something like that, a very old man. But then she met the love of her life, and she had an affair with a guy who was poor. And she has his baby. She goes away, has his baby. She didn't want the baby. She says, I really didn't want the baby. He wanted the baby. I didn't want the baby. So to make a long story short, she ties a rock, I guess, around a rope, ties it to the baby, throws it in the lake, drowns the baby, and then he shoots himself over this. And she doesn't seem to see anything wrong with that scenario, which gives us a little insight into Estelle, I guess. What did you make of that? Did you make anything more of that situation?
I mean, I think it's interesting that Estelle is simultaneously the most superficial and the most disturbed of the three. Yeah. And the one with, I mean, I thought her revelation was the most shocking. And I think in the movie, I think it's really portrayed quite well how Inez is able to convince Garson that, none of them are there by mistake, and they gang up on her, and how she just loses her mind until she makes that confession. I think Estelle is how I think there are a lot of people in modernity that live like Estelle. I'll say that.
Yes.
I think a lot of Estelles. I'll say that.
Well, then Garson comes up with another suggestion, right? He's so full of suggestions. He's got all sorts of ways to find salvation, how they can help one another. He's going to suggest we'll help each other here. I mean, we're stuck with each other, so let's see if we can help each other. So Inez now reflects, all of a sudden, she starts to have this vision, I guess. I don't know what to call it. Either she's actually looking on Earth or she's having a vision of what's happening. Hard to tell. But what's going on is that somehow a man and a woman are going to make love, I believe, in her bed. And this is very offensive to her. It's like she never existed down there, and she's been erased. And so everything she owns has now been taken over by other people, and her person is gone. And she says, now it's all done. It's all finished. She feels empty, and she even admits to the term, really, I'm really dead. So she's kind of the first one to remember, to really remark about this. Estelle reflects upon a young man that she had. And she goes through this lengthy thing about dancing with him, and this guy, I guess he's about 18 years old. And she was having an affair with him, having a tango. And then Inez picks up on, and she starts to dance with Estelle, having this little tango. She's still trying to seduce Estelle. And then Estelle makes a play for Garson, and this enrages Inez a little bit more. Inez, and I think you were talking about the trio, Inez wants Estelle wants Garson, and Garson doesn't want any of them. And that's pretty much the triad that we're talking about. So you can see how it certainly doesn't work out. But he begins to warm up to Estelle's seduction. Estelle's pretty good at this seduction in the movie, right?
Oh, yeah.
In the movie.
Oh, yeah, she's a looker.
She's pretty good. She knows how to use what she's got.
Yeah, but you know why? But it doesn't work for him, and this is a big deal, right? Like he can't get his mind off being perceived as a coward, and so even when Estelle is trying to seduce him, he can't separate the physical from the mental or the emotional or anything like that. So the entire time he's asking her, do you trust me? Do you love me? Do you think I look like a coward? What if I was a coward? Would you love me anyway? And Garcon cannot commit. Like, the one delight that he could possibly have in hell is to be able to have this sex pot for himself. He has no man to compete with, and Inez is not an option because she's not interested in a lesbian love affair. So Garcon could have his way with this sex pot, and he can't get his mind off of the perception because he knows that she's only interested in him because he's the only man there, and that she'll never love him for his innermost being, because I think in the heart of hearts, he knows that he's a man of bad Sartrean faith, that truly he is unlovable and unredeemable because he is a coward, and he did let other things beyond his own choice determine who he was, and he can't fix it. It was all final. There's nothing he can do to make it right. And he can't get, he will be forever tortured by this in this timeless quasi-eternity. And so much so that he can't even commit to sexual copulation. Probably
the easiest thing that a guy can do, right?
Yeah.
But now, do you think, I was listening to this, I think on the third run, I got to thinking, what if Garcon would have said, I am a coward, I accept that I'm a coward? Would that have been, in a sense, his salvation in the eyes of Sartre? Would he have been authentic, accepting who he was?
Well, that would be like accepting, there's that, I don't know if it's that writing where Sartre analyzes the waiter. I think you and I listened to the Charlton Heston audio production of the Giants of Philosophy together, and how Sartre described the waiter who cared about his role as waiter way too much, was a little too fast, was a little too mechanical, a little too robotic. I think Sartre would have a problem if Garcon remained a coward. The problem is, it doesn't seem like this place allows for further development of one's essence. And that's with hell. They can't cry, they can't develop, they can't emotionally evolve. So even if you were to acknowledge that he was a coward, how can he transcend it? What he is, it's a little bit like his character has been, he had his time on Earth, it's been formed, and he might be stuck with it. And that might be part of the hell, is that you can't, I think part of hell is the fact that you can't grow anymore. You can't, you can't further determine your essence.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's a great observation, because in this very next little scene here, he confesses that he got shot because he ran. It's almost like a confession that he was a coward, but he needs other people to say, no, you weren't a coward. You were heroic, because he's not authentic, because the authentic person has that sense of I am who I am. But he has a sense of I am who you tell me I am. And so neither one of them can get rid of that sense of who they are being determined by the other person. And then Estelle continues with the seduction. She's still she wants to see herself in the eyes of Garcon as being attractive, as being a lover. So she's not going to let up, because she's fighting for who she wants to be. But he can only think of himself, like he said, thinks of himself as being dead and being a coward. If only one person could admit he wasn't a coward, it would save him. And Inez convinces Garcon that her opinion is inauthentic. So during this sexual fling they're kind of having, where Estelle is trying to seduce Garcon, and he's almost there, but not quite. Inez throws a wet blanket on it, and she says, she'd accept you, whoever you are. She'll say whatever she needs to say. She'd tell you that you were God Almighty if you would go along with her seduction.
Well, this is the part of the thing, is that I think Inez recognizes that Estelle is not out of bad faith, and in herself has turned herself into a thing. So what difference does Estelle, as this sexual play thing, what difference does it mean, even if she were to acknowledge you as being heroic? What does that mean? Right? She's not a freely determined individual, right? Yeah. It would be like being affirmed by, I don't know, like an animal.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know,
Yeah. Or it's, yeah, it's like making a recording of yourself telling yourself you're not a
yeah,
coward. It's
or
meaningless.
yeah, a robot, an
Yeah.
automaton, like,
Right.
or looking into the mirror and saying, "You're just the greatest, the smartest." It's like that Stuart Smiley
Yeah.
skit from Saturday Night Live in the early '90s, where it's like, "And I love myself." No, you don't. You don't really.
But you know, Inez reveals something here about all three of them. None of them are authentic. None. You couldn't trust anything any of them say, including Inez, because they're all manipulators, and they've all proven that. So
Right.
you're not going to get any valid confirmation from any one of them.
Right, because the true person of freedom for Sartre, the person who truly wills their existential freedom for Sartre, and I know this by way of Simone de Beauvoir, because I spent so much time teaching the ethics of ambiguity, the true existentialist realizes that their freedom is bound up in the freedom of others. So when I will my own choices in my essence, they're interconnected to everyone else, so that I'm willing each individual within the cobweb of existence their freedom as well. And all of these individuals want to determine somebody else. And I'll have to say that that's probably why Inez at the very beginning says that torturers have the looks of cowards or are afraid, because I think they know that they're doing violence to the thing that is supposed to, if an existentialist can say there's anything holy and good in the world, and I don't know if they can, but this being for itself, they know they're reducing to material by trying to subject their will to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And that there's something that goes against all of what it means to be a human, to do that, to turn someone into a thing. And none of them are willing the freedom of the other.
Right. And then Garcin, at this point, he just gets disgusted with both of them. And he tries to leave. He tries to break down the door, tries to open up the door, pounds on it, does everything. He says, you know, let me out of here. I can't take it anymore. And this is where he gives that line you mentioned before. I'd rather suffer the, you know, bring on the hot pokers in the fire. Anything to just get me out of this room. This mental anguish is just unbearable. And then the door opens. Right. This is a pretty dramatic moment. Right. This may have been the climax of I'm not, you know, all that heavy in literature, but I think this is kind of the climax where they're all three together and the door opens. And now what do they do, right?
All right. So I got to ask you something about this. So this is the only time something happens in the play that's like not part of this psychological merry-go-round that we've been talking about the entire time. Right. So the door opens, like all Garcon wants to do is to get the heck out of there, right? And then the door opens. He's given his opportunity to make a choice, right? To leave them all behind and explore all the other passages and do whatever else. And what does he do? He won't leave it. Do you think that this is an opportunity for Garcon to transcend his cowardice and show that he actually is brave? And the fact that he won't leave this torturous merry-go-round, do you think this shows that he persists as a coward? He says that the reason why he says that he can't go is that he doesn't really need Estelle all that much. Estelle tries to throw Inez out because she wants to, you know, get it on with Garcon, and Inez keeps killing the vibe. Yeah. But Garcon wants to close the door and go back in with Inez because he respects Inez. He knows Inez and them have this trait of being these torturers together. They have this mental connection. They respect one another, yet they hate one another. And he feels like his salvation is still hung up in getting Inez to acknowledge that he's not a coward. When he could have just left them all behind and proved it. But then he thinks, oh, they'd still be talking about me and they'd say I turned my back on this situation, which further proves he's still wrapped up in what everybody else thinks about him. And that's what cowards do. They don't act on their choice. They always act on what other people think.
Yeah. You know, I asked him, did I think that? I thought that, but the thought was very far back. You brought it out a lot more. I didn't really say it or write it down, but I wondered that. So you really brought that out really well. And I'm wondering if this also reflects on why people stay in abusive relationships. He wanted out, but when the opportunity was given to him, what did he do? He didn't take it. He wanted to come back in again because it was better to have what he was familiar with. Right? He didn't have the strength to leave because that's the unknown. He didn't know what was out there. Maybe something worse, right, was going through his mind. So maybe he should just stay with what he's got. So yeah, that was kind of a defining moment there. Estelle, like you said, Estelle tries to throw Inez out because she figures, get Inez out of here, and then I've got Garson, and I can get all the positive feedback that I need. Then they shut the door. And then they I think that's a defining moment because in my notes, this is where acceptance begins. I think from this point on, they realize they are stuck with each other because given the opportunity, they don't take it. So this is where we would say, if you were following the stages of grief, they come to that point where this is it. We've got to make this work. I have to accept it. So then they discuss once again who they really are. There's a need for Garson again to convince Inez he's not a coward. If he can do that, he'll be saved. And then he goes into a defense of himself. And this is where he asks that question that we in length discussed. Can life be judged by a single action? And yes and no. Yes and no, right, in my opinion, because not necessarily if it's one isolated action, but if that action is a culmination of who you are, yes, it makes who you are visible to everybody else, even to yourself. So sometimes our actions betray us, and sometimes they reveal us. So for me, that was a defining remark, because that kind of spoke to me. Did that speak to you at all there, or more than it did to me?
I guess the thing is that I think they matter because I think they can reveal what's on the inside. But I'm of this mind that you can never, it's like with Kierkegaard, right? Like Kierkegaard, if our salvation, if our religious salvation were just one defining act, we would triumph too early. We would suffer from triumphalism, right? We would be like, oh, I'm converted. I don't have to do anything else. But the whole point of what Kierkegaard's trying to say, the reason why faith and religion is so difficult is that it constantly has to be renewed and integrated into one's being. So that act can say something, but like you can't get comfortable with it if it's an act that reflects on you positively. Similarly, if you fail in the action to disclose who you really are, it's important to have a sort of optimism that you can rewrite and pick up. And if you had denied Christ or something like that, that you can eventually come to accept him or something like that, that you're not closed off to it from all time. I think what Sartre's trying to say is, understand that this is the only life that you have. So it's incredibly important to get the choices right and to disclose your being as soon as you can, because you never know what's going to be taken away from you. Might be put in front of the firing squad, may contract pneumonia, you may be suicided with the gas or whatever else. So don't dally, don't delay. And we only have one chance to really write our story on our faces and write our story upon this world.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes that one act, if we get to thinking of it being the only defining moment, then we think as long as we don't do that act, we're okay. So if we have all these evil thoughts and hatred and lustful thoughts, it's okay as long as we don't act upon them. So we have to be careful that we, again, keep some kind of a balance and equilibrium that, yes, the act is important because it reveals, but just because you don't do the act doesn't mean you're a better person. So, when Jesus says, he says, even if you lust after another woman, you've already committed adultery. I think that reveals that hidden agenda that we might have, that we're still guilty, even if we don't, maybe the opportunity was lacking. So what I said. So then he makes an interesting statement here. He says, a man is what he wills himself to be.
Yeah.
And then he
This
goes
is,
in.
oh
Yeah.
God. And this exchange with Inez is one of the best in the whole play, which I think you're coming up on here.
Yeah, well, yeah, he says, I died too soon before it could be finished. But Inez disagrees. She jumps in. You are your life and you're nothing else. So she wants to continue this argument because she sees that it gives her power. You're a coward because I wish it. So she found his Achilles heel, and now she's what did I say? Capitalizing upon it. She knows he needs to hear somebody say, you're not a coward. And so she reverses it. You are a coward. Why? Simply because I wish it, because you're defined but what I say. Did you want to jump in on anything with that? Because that's a kind of a key moment, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to find the I'm trying to find the exact quote. Because he calls her a poisonous woman, right?
Oh,
here it is. Oh yeah, here. He says, Garcon says, I died too soon. I wasn't allowed time to do my deeds. Inez, one always dies too soon or too late, and yet one's whole life is complete at that moment with a line drawn neatly under it, ready for the summing up. You are your life and nothing else. Garcon, what a poisonous woman you are, with an answer for everything.
Yeah, can you imagine being stuck in a room with Inez? Oh man.
I like Inez. I think
in a way you do.
In a way I do.
But still, I wouldn't want to be on her bad side, Luke.
No. I wouldn't want to be on her bad side.
I wouldn't want to be on in a dating relationship with Inez.
Well, I don't think she would want one with either of us, so I don't think it's going to be an issue.
Good point. And then the comment. So this, though this is hell, he says. Hell is other people, right? This is kind of the culmination, the last few lines of the play. And Estelle tries to kill her with a letter opener. So Estelle, I have that in my notes, because Estelle and Inez are still bickering back and forth. And Estelle's had enough of Inez, so she grabs this letter opener, which has no apparent purpose, since there's no letters, there's no paper, there's no books, but just a letter opener. And so it gave me the impression that this was the purpose of the letter opener being there.
Yeah, what's interesting.
Very moment.
Yeah, at the very moment, it's interesting how everything is really orchestrated. At the beginning, when I noticed it when I watched the movie the third time, when the valet is showing Garcon when he first gets to hell everything that's there. He shows him. He's like, "Well, what's this?" He's like, "Oh, it's just a common letter opener." And he's like, and he asks the valet, "What's it for?" And the valet, it's the only time the valet doesn't give an answer. He just shrugs his shoulders and he goes, "I don't know." And the valet knew the entire time what it was for. That it was there in case someone tried to either kill themselves or kill somebody else as a way to get out of hell. And I guess I've got the exchange between Garcon, Estelle, and Inez. I'll just read it if that's okay. Garcon, yeah. This bronze, yes, now's the moment. I'm looking at this thing on the mantelpiece and I understand that I'm in hell. I tell you, everything's been thought out beforehand. They knew I'd stand at the fireplace, stroking this thing of bronze with all those eyes intent on me, devouring me. What? Only 2 of you? I thought there were more, many more. So this is hell. I'd never have believed it. Remember all we were told about the torture chambers, the fire and brimstone, the burn mar, the old wives' tale. There's no need for red hot pokers. Hell is other people. Estelle, my darling, please, goes on thrusting her away. No, let me be. She is between us. I cannot love you when she's watching. Estelle, right. In that case, I'll stop her watching. She picks up the paper knife from the table, rushes at Inez, and stabs her several times. Inez, struggling and laughing. But you crazy creature, what do you think you're doing? You knew quite well I'm dead. Estelle, dead? She drops the knife, a pause. Inez picks up the knife and jabs her with it regretfully. Dead, dead, dead. Knives, poison, ropes, all useless. It has happened already. Do you understand? Once and for all. So here we are forever. And then they laugh. and they all just laugh forever. My God, how funny, forever. So they're just like, at the end, they're just all maniacally laughing in a chorus together. Like they know that they're like, are they laughing? Because why does it end like that? That they're just laughing out. Like the play ends with them laughing. Why do you think it's laughter? Just the absurdity of it all, or what?
Yeah. I think that's a good way. It's their final acceptance. This is where they reach stage 5, a total acceptance of their death, of their fate. And Garcin's, the last line, at least in the text here, says, well, let's get on with it, ... In other words, this is it. We got to do what we can. We may be here. We're going to fight forever, but we got to accept it. So, yeah, I think it was kind of like a nervousness to finally let it out that, okay, we all accept who we are now. We all accept our situation. So I think it was a laugh of release as much as anything else.
It's not even for their own individual. Isn't it kind of like that kind of laughter is kind of like submission to a foe or something like that? I think about like someone who beats me at chess or beats me at basketball or something like that. And I comprehend and I step back that I'll just never beat them. Like that it's just all rigged and they're always 10 steps ahead of me. And it's just like after a while, you just kind of stand back and you do the slow clap where you just go, I respect you because I see how you have put this whole machine in order, and yet I'm doomed and cursed within it, but I have to step back and acknowledge that it's a brilliant plan.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder if these characters are stepping back and realizing all the divine machinery or all the metaphysical machinery and maybe just having this moment of deferential awe to it, even though they're damned for all time. They're like, it works brilliantly. It's just a perfect machine. It's what a perfect torture device. It's almost a testimony to something greater than ourselves.
Yeah, definitely there. I think this is a great opportunity for all of us to interpret that final laugh and see what it would mean. Why would we laugh like that in the situation? Because I think there's a momentum where the laughter seems to belong there. You know, maybe the way we're telling the story, it might seem a little odd, but when you see the momentum of the story, that's how it ends. You kind of know this is the end. And that's how, and then the story just kind of fades away. And that's how we leave Inez, Estelle, and Garcin for eternity.
Yeah. So yeah. I think I think we did a pretty good job covering it. You know, some of the other themes that I thought maybe worth discussing about is like the fact that they don't sleep, they don't read, they don't have eyelids and stuff like that. But
we definitely missed some things, Luke, but we would have been able to cover all of it in detail. I think we hit the highlights, and it would take more than an hour and a half to really fully analyze this. But now let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Because I thought about this, and I didn't ask you this question before because I wanted your candid opinion here. The point of the play, at least according to some, is that we are what other people make us to be. I forgot, what was the line that Sartre uses here? I can't remember.
You mean existence precedes essence?
No, well, no, the summary of this play here, the summary of the play is more that I'm a I see myself in you. I define myself by you. I'm thinking, was Sartre really trying to say that who we are is dependent upon the other person? Because is that really authentic? Is it more true to say that the other people are mirrors of who we are? In other words, are we putting the blame on the mirror? Is it like I get up in the morning, look into the mirror and say, man, what an ugly mirror I got. I got to get myself a better mirror, you know, because it's a reflection of me. So is it really fair to say that hell is other people? That was like, is it really fair to say hell is other people when they're really a reflection of who we are? So was Sartre saying that inauthentically, or was he saying that to provoke us to think of that line and realize well, yeah, in a sense, we realize we realize it through other people, but hell isn't the other people. It's still me.
Right. So this is an interesting question about like what is Sartre talking about here? Is this really, what about the universal human condition is Sartre trying to say about this play? And I think what's interesting is, ought it to be better thought of as like hell can be other people, or other people is hell? Like, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say here is I think Sartre wants to maintain that we are all of humanity is sort of like a cobweb where we affect one another. And because if we weren't all interconnected, I think the concern would be is that we would abandon moral projects that involve the other altogether. I think the question that's interesting to me is whether or not other people has to be hell. If we can make our ethical projects into, or if we can comport ourselves in such a way with our ethical projects that they will the freedom of other beings, where we don't find it so hellish, that we can actually enjoy their company, where we could exist in a triad. And you know, like, for instance, I don't find working with you to be hell, but I think you and I think like you and I talk every day, and we're working together all the time now. There's nothing hellish about it. Right. But what are we doing in this process? Like, you and I are willing each other's freedom in this process. It's not like I'm calling you up all the time. I'm like, oh, Bob, like my life is so terrible. Let me like dump all my problems onto you. And it's not like you're calling on me all the time to like borrow tools or whatever. We're not using each other in this way. Like, you and I are like becoming this more perfected ethical being by willing each other's freedom. So I guess that what I'm trying to say is, I don't think we're as doomed as these characters. I think we can exist in community in relation with other individuals and have it not be hell. It's just the problem is that so many people act in bad faith or have become bad faith types that it can make life hell for us.
Do you think that we know it? Or do you think that we go through life like Estelle, and we go through life like Garcin, and we really don't realize it because we don't have that condition? Bring a little bit of Kierkegaard back. Do you think that we're missing the condition, and this is the result because we don't have that revelation from God as to who we really are? Because instead of using God as our mirror, we're using other people as our mirror.
Well, I don't know. I'll tell you this. I think my perspective now, apart, I mean, I think Sartre has a great pragmatic import. I think Sartre can ring some alarm bells about how we're living our lives. And we do find ourselves in a hellish merry-go-round like Inez, Estelle, and Garcon. I think without reference to God, we can have this sort of revelation from Sartre's Noetic and his other works to say that we need to either act in such a way that we're willing the freedom of the individuals that are in this merry-go-round with us, or to surround ourselves with individuals who have that same sort of ethical commitment. Because I've definitely been in scenarios where I've been in this torturous hobby horse, but now it's really, I've broken free from it entirely. I feel like I've surrounded myself in an existentially cyclical upbuilding hobby horse. I don't know.
Okay.
A spiraling forward hobby horse, a intergalactic traveling hobby horse. That's the sleep deprivation kicking in right now.
Oh, well, I think we covered everything that we could have covered in the time that we had. Hopefully everybody is going to watch it now.
Yeah.
Or read it.
Yeah, I would advise listening to the audio, because if you're watching this on video, I look like hell. I've slept like 8 hours in 2 days.
You got one of those mirrors that you're looking into. You need to get a new mirror, Luke.
No, you do not want to see this face right now. All right. Well, why don't we bring it there to an end, Bob?
Yes, sir.
I don't think this is the last time we'll tangle with Sartre. We've been kicking around the idea of looking at Sartre's The Flies and his relation to Baudelaire, and maybe even some late era Sartre and how that may have differed from the existentialist, quasi Marxist, whatever Sartre was in his life. So we'll be back with some more stuff, but let's bring this to a close. I'll put this on the Noetic app, and everybody can go download it. Hopefully this was helpful. And Bob, thanks again for.
Thank you, my friend.
All right, see you, buddy.